Something has just snapped beneath the Pacific, and right now, the coast of Japan is bracing for what may be coming next. This is not a drill. Sirens are screaming across seaside cities as people pour into the streets, staring toward a dark, restless ocean that no longer looks calm. A massive offshore earthquake has struck without warning, and scientists are terrified about what's happening beneath the seafloor. Right now, emergency alerts are lighting up phones across the country as evacuation orders spread along the coastline. Trains are stopping, ports are shutting down, and one question is echoing across the nation. If the ocean is already moving, how long before the waves arrive? It begins with a violent jolt that rattles windows across Japan's northeastern coast. At first, it feels like the thousands of earthquakes the country experiences every year. A sharp tremor, a few seconds of shaking. But then the ground keeps moving. Buildings sway harder. Street lights swing above empty intersections. Inside homes, dishes crash to the floor as the vibration grows stronger, deeper, rolling through the ground like a freight train passing beneath the city. Phones begin screaming with emergency alerts. Strong earthquake detected. Possible tsunami. Evacuate immediately. In the fishing town of Miyako, people rush outside as the pavement ripples beneath their feet. Car alarms begin blaring across the harbor district. Boats tied to the docks slam violently against their ropes as the water in the port churns in strange, unnatural circles. The shaking lasts longer than anyone expects. 30 seconds. 40. Nearly a full minute of violent motion. Then suddenly it stops. For a few seconds the silence feels unnatural. But the quiet doesn't last. Within moments, loudspeakers mounted across the city crackle to life. Tsunami warning. Evacuate to higher ground immediately. Along the coastline, harbor workers turn toward the open Pacific, staring at a horizon that suddenly feels threatening. The ocean looks wrong. The water appears to be pulling away from the shoreline in slow, uneasy pulses. Fishermen standing on the docks exchange nervous glances. They've seen this before, and they know what it means. Across dozens of coastal cities, evacuation sirens begin wailing. Long, haunting alarms echo through neighborhoods as local governments activate emergency tsunami protocols. Trains grind to a halt. Bullet trains racing between Tokyo and northern cities slow to emergency stops. Station announcements suddenly shift from routine travel updates to urgent evacuation instructions. On highways leading inland, traffic begins to build as drivers abandon their routines and race toward higher ground. Parents rush into schools, pulling children out of classrooms. Shops close instantly. In seaside districts, police officers shout through megaphones directing people uphill. Leave the coastline now. But even as the evacuation begins, scientists monitoring seismic activity realize something far more disturbing. The earthquake that just struck beneath the Pacific is not small. It's enormous, and the energy released along the offshore fault may have just displaced millions of tons of seawater, which means somewhere beyond the horizon, the ocean may already be rising. Inside the headquarters of the Japan Meteorological Agency in Tokyo, the first data arrives within seconds of the earthquake. Red alerts flash across multiple screens as seismic stations along Japan's coastline transmit violent readings. Lines on digital graphs spike sharply upward. The tremor wasn't shallow. It came from deep beneath the Pacific, along one of the most dangerous fault zones on Earth. Technicians stare, at the numbers in disbelief. The magnitude keeps rising as more sensors report in. 7.8, then 8.0, then higher. Across the operations room, analysts begin speaking faster, their voices tight with urgency. This isn't a routine tremor. This is something much bigger. A senior seismologist steps toward the central console and issues the command no one wants to give. Activate full tsunami warning. Within seconds, the warning spreads across the entire country. Emergency broadcasts interrupt television programs. Radios switch to urgent bulletins. Phones across Japan light up with the same message, repeating again and again. Tsunami warning. Move to higher ground immediately. Meanwhile, deep beneath the Pacific, pressure waves are still rippling through the ocean floor. Seismologists begin calculating the rupture zone, the area where the fault line suddenly slipped. And the early estimate is terrifying. The rupture may stretch for more than 100 kilometers beneath the seabed. That kind of violent movement doesn't just shake the land. It lifts the ocean. Back in the monitoring center, another set of alarms begins flashing. Offshore pressure sensors, devices placed along the seafloor to detect tsunami waves, begin transmitting abnormal readings. The water above the rupture zone is already shifting, not violently, but enough to send a warning pulse across the network. Scientists exchange tense glances. If the seafloor rose even a few meters during the quake, millions of tons of water could already be moving outward in every direction. The wave would be invisible in deep water, barely noticeable to ships far offshore. But as it approaches land, the ocean will compress the energy upward. And that is when the real danger begins. Within minutes, Japan's National Emergency Cabinet convenes inside the Crisis Command Center in Tokyo. Government officials, disaster response leaders, and military representatives gather around live feeds from coastal regions. The message from scientists is blunt. This earthquake has the power to generate a destructive tsunami, and depending on how much the seafloor moved, the first waves could reach parts of the Japanese coast within minutes. Outside the building, helicopters are already lifting off, because the race has begun, and the clock is now ticking against the ocean. Far beneath the dark surface of the Pacific Ocean, something enormous has just shifted. Along the edge of the Japan Trench, the Earth's crust is locked in a constant struggle. One massive plate of the planet is slowly pushing beneath another, grinding forward inch by inch over decades. Most of the time, that movement is silent, invisible, but sometimes the pressure builds for so long that the rock can no longer hold. And when it finally snaps, the entire seafloor can move in a single violent motion. That's what scientists now believe has just happened. Inside seismic monitoring centers, new data continues pouring in from hundreds of sensors scattered across the region. Each one is painting a clearer picture of the rupture unfolding beneath the ocean floor. The quake wasn't a single crack. It was a massive tear. Preliminary calculations showed the fault may have ripped open across a huge stretch of seabed, with sections of the ocean floor shifting upward while others collapsed downward. That sudden movement acts like a giant underwater piston. When the seafloor rises, the water above it is forced upward as well. Not just a little. Entire columns of ocean are displaced. At first, the disturbance spreads silently through the deep sea. Out there, far from land, the wave may only rise a meter or two. Ships passing over it might barely notice anything unusual. But the energy beneath that wave is enormous, And as it moves toward shallower water, the physics of the ocean begins to change. The deeper the ocean, the faster the tsunami travels. Across the Pacific Basin, waves like this can move as fast as a commercial airplane, sometimes reaching speeds close to 800 kilometers per hour. But when the wave approaches land, the ocean floor begins to rise beneath it. The water has nowhere else to go. So the energy compresses upward. The wave grows taller, stronger, deadlier. Back inside the monitoring room at the Japan Meteorological Agency, scientists stare at real-time readings from deep-sea tsunami sensors. One buoy suddenly reports a sharp pressure change, then another. A third sensor detects the same thing several kilometers away. The ocean is moving. Not violently yet, but enough to confirm the fear spreading through the room. A tsunami wave has likely formed above the rupture zone. And somewhere out there beyond the horizon, that wave is already racing toward Japan's coast. What makes the situation even more frightening is the uncertainty. No one knows yet how large the wave might become. The shape of the seafloor, the depth of the rupture, and the angle of the fault movement will all determine how much energy is transferred into the ocean. But one thing is now painfully clear to the scientists watching the data. The earthquake was strong enough to lift the ocean itself. And when that happens, the coastline becomes the target. The moment the nationwide tsunami warning spreads, Japan's coastline erupts into motion. Sirens begin howling across hundreds of towns at once. The long, rising wail of the tsunami alarm echoes through neighborhoods, ports, and fishing villages as emergency loudspeakers repeat the same command over and over. Evacuate immediately. Move to higher ground. In the coastal city of Sendai, people pour into the streets within minutes. Office workers abandon their desks. Store owners pull down metal shutters without finishing their transactions. Cyclists pedal furiously uphill toward evacuation zones marked along the streets. Traffic builds instantly. Cars jam the narrow roads leading away from the harbor district. Drivers lean on their horns, trying to force movement through intersections that are already clogged with vehicles. Police officers sprint into the chaos, waving drivers forward while shouting directions through megaphones. Leave your car if traffic stops. Move on foot. Near the waterfront, fishing crews scramble to secure their boats. Some attempt to guide vessels away from the harbor, hoping to ride out the incoming waves in deeper water. Others abandon the docks entirely, sprinting uphill alongside tourists who were only minutes ago strolling along the sea walls. Inside elementary schools, teachers move with urgent discipline. Children are lined up quickly and escorted toward designated evacuation routes. Emergency helmets appear from storage cabinets, strapped tightly onto small heads as teachers count their students again and again. Across the region, Japan's earthquake-trained population moves quickly, but even preparation cannot stop the rising fear spreading through the crowd, because the ocean remains quiet. Too quiet. Along several beaches, the waterline begins doing something deeply unsettling. It starts to pull away. The sea slowly retreats from the shore, exposing rocks, seaweed, and stretches of wet sand that are normally hidden beneath the tide. Fishermen who have lived here their entire lives freeze when they see it. They know this sign. It means the ocean is gathering itself, and when it returns it will not come back gently. High on evacuation hills overlooking the coast, crowds begin gathering at designated shelters. Families huddle together while volunteers distribute emergency blankets and bottled water. But no one is sitting comfortably. Thousands of people stand facing the ocean, watching, waiting, because somewhere beyond that wide horizon an enormous wall of water may already be racing toward them. Along Japan's coastline, the evacuation is no longer just an emergency procedure. It has become a race against something no one can see yet. In the harbor town of Kasanuma, a fisherman named Takashi Sato abandons his nets the moment the sirens begin screaming. He has spent 30 years working these waters, waking before sunrise to guide his small boat through the narrow harbor. But today the ocean feels wrong. The water in the port is moving in slow, uneasy pulses, sloshing against the docks as if something enormous beneath the sea has disturbed its rhythm. Takashi doesn't hesitate. He runs. Up the steep streets toward higher ground, passing tourists who stare back toward the harbor in confusion. Some are still filming the ocean with their phones, unaware of how quickly the situation could turn deadly. Further south, near the coastal resorts outside Kamakura, families rush out of beachfront hotels carrying backpacks, children, and whatever belongings they could grab in the first frantic minutes. Hotel staff shout directions toward evacuation hills. Move inland, follow the signs. A young mother clutches her daughter tightly while trying to keep pace with the crowd moving uphill. The child keeps asking the same question again and again. Is the ocean coming? No one answers, because the truth is no one knows yet. Meanwhile, along Japan's rugged northern shoreline, elderly residents are being helped into evacuation vehicles by volunteers and local firefighters. Some move slowly, leaning heavily on walking sticks, refusing to leave until they have locked the doors of homes they have lived in for decades. For many of them, the memory of past tsunamis is still painfully fresh. They remember the sound, the roar that arrives before the water. At coastal gas stations, travelers abandon their cars entirely as traffic stalls along narrow roads leading inland. People begin moving on foot, climbing staircases that lead toward elevated evacuation towers built after previous disasters. Everywhere along the coast, the same emotion spreads, fear mixed with disbelief, because the sky above Japan remains calm. The wind is light. The sea beyond the horizon looks peaceful. But the warnings keep repeating through loudspeakers and emergency broadcasts. Do not return to the shoreline. Stay on high ground, because somewhere out in the vast Pacific, the ocean may already be moving. As the evacuation spreads across Japan's coastline, the country's emergency response system begins operating at full capacity. Inside the National Disaster Command Center in Tokyo, rows of monitors display live feeds from dozens of coastal cities. Helicopter cameras sweep over highways packed with vehicles moving inland. Evacuation towers are filling quickly. Hills overlooking the ocean are now crowded with thousands of people watching the distant horizon. Officials from the Japan Meteorological Agency continue analyzing incoming data as quickly as it arrives. But the pressure is building. Phone networks across several coastal prefectures begin slowing under the sudden surge of calls and messages. Families are trying desperately to reach loved ones. Are you safe? Did you evacuate? Where are you? The lines clog with panic. At the same time, emergency shelters are filling faster than expected. Schools, community centers, and reinforced evacuation buildings open their doors to thousands of residents who fled the coastline within minutes of the warning. Volunteers scramble to organize supplies, water, blankets, medical kits, but no one knows how long people may have to remain there. Meanwhile, transportation systems are under strain. Several major rail lines shut down automatically after the earthquake sensors detect violent ground motion. Bullet trains remain halted on tracks between cities as safety inspections begin. Passengers wait inside silent train cars, staring anxiously at their phones for updates. In some coastal districts, local police began blocking roads that lead back toward the ocean. A few residents attempt to return home to retrieve belongings, but officers stop them immediately. Do not go back. Stay on high ground. The warnings repeat again and again through emergency broadcast systems. And yet the most difficult part of the crisis is the waiting. Because even with Japan's advanced warning systems, no one can see the tsunami itself. The ocean beyond the horizon is still hidden from view. Deep-sea sensors continue transmitting pressure data back to monitoring stations. And with every new reading, scientists try to answer the one question that now matters more than anything else. How large is the wave? Because if the energy released by the earthquake was strong enough, then somewhere out in the dark waters of the Pacific, the ocean may already be gathering into something far more dangerous. Night is beginning to fall along parts of Japan's coastline, but no one is leaving the evacuation zones. High above the sea, thousands of people stand in silence on hills, parking structures, and reinforced evacuation towers. From these elevated points, they stare out across the darkening Pacific, searching for any sign of movement. But the ocean remains strangely calm. Inside the monitoring center of the Japan Meteorological Agency, the tension is unbearable. New data continues streaming in from offshore sensors. One buoy confirms a wave disturbance passing far out at sea. Another detects a second surge of pressure moving through deeper water. Scientists study the readings carefully. The wave is real, but its full strength remains uncertain. In deep water, a tsunami can appear almost invisible, a slow rise and fall of the ocean's surface that barely disturbs ships passing above it. Yet as that same wave approaches the coast, the seabed begins forcing the water upward. Energy that was once spread across miles of open ocean compresses into a rising wall of water. That transformation can happen in minutes, which means the coastline may still face a sudden and violent surge. Back along the shore, police patrol the empty streets of seaside towns that only hours ago were filled with daily life. Restaurants sit dark. Fishing docks creak quietly in the night air. Harbor lights reflect off water that now feels threatening. Occasionally the sea pulls back again from the shoreline. Small withdrawals that cause murmurs of fear to ripple through the crowds watching from higher ground. Every movement of the ocean now feels like a warning. And scientists monitoring the earthquake's aftermath have one more concern. The offshore fault that triggered the quake may not have finished moving. Powerful aftershocks continue rattling the region beneath the Pacific. Each one carries the potential to shift the seafloor again. If that happens, the ocean could surge a second time, even hours after the first quake. Across Japan, emergency broadcasts continue repeating the same message. Remain on high ground. Do not return to coastal areas, because tonight the country is facing a terrifying uncertainty. The earthquake has already shaken the land. The evacuation has already emptied the coastline. But somewhere beyond the horizon,